Imperial Yeast is at it again with their Imperialis project, creating yet another unique proprietary strain through hybridization. In addition to its excellent attenuation and rapid reduction of diacetyl, I-10 Mangostini contributes robust ripe tropical fruit, strawberry, and lychee notes that complement modern hops. And as a Kveik hybrid, it can be fermented anywhere from 78 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit or 26 to 32 degrees Celsius without any negative issues. Head over to imperialyeast.com to learn more about I-10 Mangostini and be sure to pick some up for your next batch of fruity IPA. Welcome to the Brew Lab. I'm currently in school studying to get my third formal degree, which will then hopefully be followed by getting a fourth formal degree. So I clearly enjoy going to school, but the path I want to follow on my journey in the brewing industry requires formal education. There are other paths, more education, less education, butt-in-seat classes, and learn-on-the-job experience. How are you supposed to make sense of it all? I'm your host, Cade Job, and today in the lab I'm speaking with Andrew Burns, Brewing and Beer Steward Instructor at Dakota County Technical College, about getting a brewing education. Now, there are a lot of opportunities for careers in the brewing industry, each with its own set of knowledge and skills that are necessary to be successful. Some jobs are more technical than others, and some things that are necessary for those jobs can be learned in more than one way, such as through experience or by taking a class or getting a certificate or degree. There is no one-size-fits-all when it comes to getting a brewing education. So Andrew and I will share our stories about the reasons why we went the way we did and the options that are out there now and available to you. Whether you want to be a brewer, brewery owner, scientist, engineer, salesperson, marketer, software engineer, you name it, there's a path for you in the brewing industry. And the main thing I want you to take away from this episode is that there are a lot of options out there, but there are paths that are open and available to you. So if you're considering making the jump into the brewing industry, or you're currently in the industry and looking for more knowledge or skills, I think you'll find something useful in this episode. If you haven't yet signed up to become a patron, please consider doing so. By becoming a patron of Brewlosophy, you get awesome rewards like access to Brewlosophy contributor recipes that we've never published, new discounts each month to YakimaValleyHops.com, and for $3 a month, access to a live monthly Q&A session with a special guest from the brewing industry. So last month's guest was Brad Ring, president of Brew Your Own magazine. And if you missed Brad's session, don't worry. When you sign up to become a patron, all of the prior sessions become available to you on our private Patreon Facebook page. This month's guest is Dana Garvis of Oregon Brew Labs, and if you want to know more about ways to analyze your beer or want someone to do it for you, Dana is the person to talk to about it. This is a unique opportunity to ask her questions about beer and brewing science, but you have to be a patron to attend. So please head over to patreon.com/Brewlosophy to find all the information you need to get access to this awesome resource. Now, thank you to everyone that's left a rating or review of the show. If you haven't yet left a rating or review, I'd love for you to do so. Every review helps us improve the show. I read all of the reviews and I love hearing from you. So if you haven't taken the time to do it, I'd really appreciate it. Feedback is brought to you by the innovative team at Haas, makers of Lupamax, a hop product with a consistent concentration of lupulin for optimized hop flavor that allows brewers to use upwards of 30% less hops to achieve similar results as T90 pellets, thus increasing yield without compromising beer quality. Now available in over 15 hop varieties, including Citra, Mosaic, Amarillo, Zotz, Sabro, Eldorado, Centennial, and more. All of us here at Brewlosophy love Lupamax, and the reviews from others are equally as positive. You can learn more about Lupamax and all the other amazing stuff Haas has to offer at johnihaas.com. That's John, the letter I, Haas.com. All right, listener Steven wrote in. He said, "Good morning, Kate. Just wanted to call in on the Applying the Science Growing and Processing Hops at Home episode. Planting is done after the ground has thawed. So for those of us in the Willamette Valley, that means March or April. When planting, the soil needs to be loose, preferably with the eyes pointing up. If not, no stress, the rhizome will figure it out. Water daily until you see the shoots, and then it's good to go and water as needed. When we moved to our house in Kaiser near Salem, Oregon almost 7 years ago, I planted hops along the south wall of the house. It is perfect. It gets unobstructed light all day during the day and gets watered daily, and that's the tallest wall of the house. It's actually about 20 feet at the peak. I planted them in inverted 5-gallon pots to make them raised and have the hops run up construction twine anchored into the fascia of the eave of the house. Currently, I'm growing Cascade and Perle, and I've got about a pound or so from each last summer, so I can't complain. Excited for fresh hop pale ale this summer. Cheers from Kaiser, Stephen." All right. Thanks, Stephen, for writing in. That's great to hear that you're getting that much. I mean, that's amazing. A pound each of Cascade and Perle from your hop plants. That's a lot of beer to brew with. And actually, speaking of that, I'd be interested to hear what you're doing with those hops. Are you drying them? Are you brewing a bunch of fresh hop beers? I mean, you said you're excited for fresh hop pale ale, but I'm wondering, are you using it all for fresh hops, or are you drying any of it? It'd be cool to know. Also, are you bottling or storing any of those beers? Kegging? I don't know. Let me know. Anyway, I'm stoked to hear that you've had great success in Salem, and I'm excited to start growing my own hops this year. So, and hopefully, I don't think I'll get enough to yield brewing trials this year, but maybe in the future. So, thanks again for writing in, Stephen, and for listening to that episode. All right, I'm going to take a quick break, and I'll be back in a few minutes with Andrew Burns talking about getting a brewing education. One of the biggest improvements to my brewing practices was the upgrade to stainless steel, and Delta Brewing Systems offers some of the lowest prices on high-quality stainless gear, like the Firm Tank, which holds 8 gallons or 30 liters of wort, comes with a domed lid to reduce the chances of a messy blow-off, and it can hold up to 4 psi of pressure. Delta Brewing Systems also has their own line of brew kettles, as well as one of the lowest-priced all-in-one electric brew systems out there, and their prices are remarkably affordable. If you're in the market for legit stainless gear that won't break the bank, you've got to check out deltabrewingsystems.com. We all know that designing recipes is really fun, and doing it well is so much easier with good software. We at Brewlosophy recently made the switch to Brewfather, and honestly, y'all, we could not be happier. Brewfather utilizes the latest technology to bring you the most robust cloud-based recipe design software that can be accessed anywhere, on your phone, tablet, desktop, and even offline. It also works seamlessly with numerous third-party devices to make it easier to monitor every step of your brew. I know change can be difficult, but trust me when I say you need to go to brewfather.app today to try it out for yourself. That's brewfather.app. Like many other homebrewers, I fell in love with beer and brewing so much that I wanted to make it a career and not just a hobby. I looked around at different brewing programs, from education to apprenticeships to short courses, certificates. Needless to say, there were a lot of options out there, but I wanted to know which one would be best for me. I made a choice, but my guests can also help us make sense of those options and reasons why you might want to consider a beer education. Andrew Burns is the Brewing and Beer Steward Instructor at Dakota County Technical College. Andrew, welcome to the Brew Lab.
Hi, Cade. Happy to be here.
Oh, man, I'm excited about this one. I mean, so you had originally, you emailed in and said, hey, let's do a podcast episode on this topic. And I said, hell yeah, that sounds great, because there are obviously multiple different pathways to getting into the brewing industry or achieving your brewing dreams or doing whatever it is that you want to do that's beer related. And so I wanted to start, do you think there is a one-size-fits-all option, or is this thing totally nuanced?
Oh, I definitely do not think there's a one-size-fits-all option. In fact, it's one of the things I like about the beer industry is that there are multiple paths to success, multiple ways to get to your goal, whatever that may be. I mean, in fact, there's multiple goals. There's multiple ways to define success within the industry. So, of course, there's going to be a lot of different pathways one could take.
Yeah, I love that too. And you'll hear me say it a bunch of times, right? There's more than one path into the industry. I think a lot of homebrewers are like, oh, I'm going to go be a brewer, right? Yeah, brewers do a lot. I mean, they brew the beer, but that's not the only path in the beer industry. There are so many other jobs and so many things that, you know, might be better suited to your skills or your desires or what you want to do. And we'll talk about all of that here. But first, I want to learn how you got into the brewing industry, Andrew. So you are, again, the Brewing and Beer Steward Instructor at Dakota County Technical College. But how did you get interested in teaching people about beer, and how did you get interested in the beer industry?
Well, you know, that's a great question. And part of my answer is that it took me, I think, embarrassingly long to realize that this is the sort of thing I wanted to be doing. In separate spheres of my life, I really enjoyed teaching, and I really enjoyed beer and working in breweries. And it wasn't until just a couple years ago when I saw the job posting for this job at Dakota County Technical College that I kind of put it all together and said, oh, wait, this would be perfect. I started homebrewing as a hobby, when I was like 21, 22 years old, and it was just something to do with roommates. I knew some older friends who had started brewing before me, and I thought what they were doing was very cool. I just really liked the process, the transformational element of brewing, taking raw ingredients and turning it into what seems like a completely unrelated product, but then you can still taste those original inputs in the final product. It just seemed like a kind of magic to me that I wanted to learn how to do. And so I was homebrewing as a hobby while going to school for music, and then eventually being a professional musician and touring and playing and recording and following beer as a hobby. I eventually wanted to settle down, got married, wanted to hang up my musician touring hat, and that's when I decided to transition, sort of like it sounds like what your background is, go from one profession to another. In this case, transition from being a working musician to being someone in the beer industry. So I started.
What instrument did you play?
I play bass. So I play bass guitar and I play upright bass. At that point, I was mostly touring as an upright bass player, playing like jazz and blues type stuff.
I'm a bass trombone. I play bass trombone.
Oh, bass trombone. All right.
It. Yeah. I love doing walking basses and stuff like that. Jazz.
Yeah,
so much
fantastic.
Fun. Yeah, dude. It sounds like you're totally a man after my own heart, right? Like that sounds a lot like my story. I was a lawyer, not a musician, but I did start in band. I was in the Longhorn band at the University of Texas, playing trombone. And it's crazy, right? Too. I mean, like you, I think I took it in maybe an embarrassingly long time too to figure out that I wanted to get into beer and do this thing. But ultimately we made that decision and we went that way. So, all right, continue with your story then. So you're the musician, you're married now, you're wanting to hang up the musician hat, look for something a little bit more stable so you're not touring. And you said you got into the beer industry.
Got into the beer industry, really pursued home brewing, worked at homebrew retailers, started teaching classes about how to brew, aimed at homebrewers. But then went to Siebel Institute in Chicago, got some formal brewing education, and then transitioned from homebrewing to professional brewing, and was the sort of the lone brewer at a small startup brewery called Chapel Brewing, where I did everything from write the recipes, order ingredients, all the way down to scrub the floors. And then moved to a larger brewery here in Minneapolis, where I wound up managing the team of brewers there. So that was at Prize Brewing in Minneapolis, where I managed our full-time brewing team. So we had multiple brewers under me, and I realized that the thing I liked best about that job was training in those brewers. When we would hire someone new, or maybe get a new piece of equipment, or maybe we wanted to improve a process or adapt a recipe from one system to another, I was constantly teaching and training and imparting my sort of knowledge that I'd taken many, many, many years to learn through working in the industry and through some formal schooling, and translate that and transfer that to the people working at the brewery with me. And so it was upon that realization of finally moving from brewing to managing that I realized that the teaching and training was really the highlight of my workday and really the thing that kept me coming back. So sort of to complete the circle, when this position at the college opened up, it seemed like such a natural fit where I could say, I'm essentially doing this job in industry. So now all I'm doing is doing that same job of teaching and training and supporting and mentoring, but in an educational context.
Yeah. And I'm guessing as a musician, you were doing private lessons probably, right? And teaching and stuff?
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, I taught private lessons for like a decade, and I loved teaching. It was one of the things I liked, playing music. Even when I hung up my touring hat and started working in breweries full time, I'd still keep a few private lessons on the side, which is why I say it took me an embarrassingly long time to realize that what am I doing? I'm brewing and teaching, but I hadn't figured out that teaching brewing was what I should be doing.
I know, right? But and the big takeaway here for me too, as I listen to you tell that story, it's that you didn't immediately decide I'm going to teach beer, right? It wasn't, you're not 18 or whatever, graduating high school or getting out from under your parents' wing and going, hey, I'm going to go teach beer, right? Like this took a long time. You did a whole bunch of other things. You were a musician, you were a brewer, you worked at a small brewery, you managed a team, you did training. I'm sure you did, instrument implementation. And if you're like any other brewers, you're also a part-time engineer and problem solver and fixer of things, right?
Electrician, plumber, janitor.
electrician. Yeah, exactly. Janitor, plumber, all of those things. And even like part-time lawyer too, right? Like trying to figure out like laws and things like, how am I supposed to, I don't know what the rules are for dumping my effluent down the drain. I got to read those things, like trying to read city codes to figure out what you can do with your, spent grains and stuff.
Right.
But in any event, so the whole point of what I say there is you listen to yourself ultimately, and you were like, you tried to find the spot that fit for you. And that's the advice that I think we're going to talk a lot about today. Especially it's advice that I like to give all the time too. There's no one size fits all. You have to find what fits for you. But the great thing about the brewing industry is, like you've already mentioned, there's a ton of things that you can do, right? You've already mentioned working at small breweries, working at big breweries, going to Siebel, right? That's something that we'll talk about. There are 4-year education, there's certificates, there's all sorts of different things. So that's what we're going to talk about. We'll talk about the first half of the show about getting a beer education and why we think that might or might not be a good thing. And then the second part of the interview, we're talking about getting into the brewing industry. How do you get that first job? How do you, develop your skills such that you can actually transition from home brewer or student to pro brewer? All right. So the first question then that I have to ask is, do you need a brewing education to work in the brewing industry?
No, you don't. And that might be surprising because I have a vested interest in getting people into a beer education. But the honest truth is you do not need a brewing education to get into the brewing industry. If you want to work in the brewing industry and you live in a major metropolitan area, chances are there's a brewery hiring right now. And you could go get an entry-level job that doesn't necessarily require any brewing education, just a willingness to work and a willingness to learn on the job. That being said, I view brewing education as more of an accelerator. The beer industry is definitely still an industry where you can start in the bottom and work your way up to the top. That it's an industry where you could start by washing kegs and end up managing an entire facility one day. That's possible, but it's becoming less possible as breweries, or craft breweries at least, get larger and get more focused on sort of capital B business. And it's also something that takes a long time. Head brewers are happy to employ people off the street to push cans and fold boxes and help with the packaging process. They're a lot less likely to trust somebody off the street with actually implementing the recipes that they spent a lot of time writing.
Yeah, or the cellar, cleaning the tanks or something, or like managing.
That's exactly right.
They're going to be much more.
What I say, mission critical processes, right?
Yeah. Oh, that's a good way. Yeah, describe it. Mission critical. I like that. I'm going to start using that.
Yeah. And so, in that regard, traditionally, this was something that took a lot of on-the-job training. You might be looking at 2, 3, 5 years of sort of on-the-job, low-level work where you're still involved with the process. You still get a lot of perks of working in the industry. You're still learning. But, there's only so much time in a production schedule for teaching and shadowing and apprenticeship. And there's a lot of information to learn. And so I view education as a way to sort of move up the steps in terms of responsibility, in terms of skill required, faster. So, at DCTC here in Minnesota, we have a 1-year program. And so that 1 year could then get you to the next step up, or even into like a head brewer type job in a smaller brewery, sort of a couple rungs up the ladder. As opposed to the long sort of put in the time sort of old school process.
Yeah. Put in the sweat and blood and tears, right? I mean, and let's be real. If you're a brewer, there's going to be all three of those things. Being real. But I think that also happens in a lot of other jobs too. It's not just breweries, but yeah. I mean, I totally agree with you. I mean, I was talking with one of my friends the other day about education, and he's works at one of the large accounting firms in the country. And he was talking about hiring processes there, and one of the things that we were talking about is it's like everyone is running this marathon, which is called working to live, right? Like you still got to pay the bills. You can do what you want to do, and have fun doing it, but you still got to pay the bills. We're all running this marathon, and an education, like you said, accelerates you. It starts you further down the path than if you don't have that education. You can still get there through experience, right? I mean, you can still go and work at a brewery and develop that experience, but with education, you may be able to move down the path quicker or run run that marathon quicker up through those rungs. That's not to say that you're going to, go get a certificate and then you're going to be able to walk into a job as a head brewer, right? You might be able to do that. You might not. It depends on your skills. It depends on what the brewery needs, all that sort of stuff. But I do like to think of it as that education. But again, the main thing for me that I come back to on this is, what is the goal? What are you trying to do, right? If you're a home brewer, you're dedicated, you love it, and you don't even know if you want to go into the brewing industry, maybe a good way to do it is to just go and work for a brewery if you can, right? If you can go and take an entry-level job, go work for a brewery and see what it's like to make beer every single day, right? Well, let me back it up. See what it's like to clean out the mash tun and clean fermenters
every single day.
Single day, right? Because that's a huge part of the job. And that's the part that nobody likes. Nobody likes cleaning the mash tun. At least I don't think I've ever met someone that was like, no, dude, that's my favorite part of the job. I love cleaning the mash tun, right? I don't think I've ever met anybody that way. But again, like, what's your goal? Are you just checking things out? Are you like, sure, you want to open your own brewery? There's different pathways to that too. You're going to need a brewing education, but like you said, also, you're going to need a capital B education, and that B is for business.
Right.
That's a real undersell too. I think there was Jamil Zainasheff said on a podcast, or actually he's written it too, in one of the BYO articles about brewing education. He said, to be successful in the brewing industry, you have to love the business of selling beer. Right. And I think that's interesting. But what do you think as an instructor, educator, and brewer?
Part of me thinks that is absolutely 100% correct, that Jamil knows exactly what he's talking about, and that ultimately we're creating a product. And so by definition, it's something that you need to sell. And that if you're creating a product that nobody wants, then you can never succeed as a brewery. But, on the other hand, I still see plenty of jobs in the industry that don't involve sales or selling in one bit. So I don't know that I can fully endorse that as a blanket statement. And if you're the kind of person who is, completely averse to sales, doesn't want to be talking about sales or accounts or, sort of some of the ways that at least in this country where we're still dealing with distributors and bar owners and the complicated 3-tier system, there's a lot of just like sales that happens in the beer industry. And if you don't want anything to do with that, that's fine. There are loads of jobs in the beer industry that don't interact with that. The higher up you go, the more connected you are to sales. So if you just want to make beer, just turn raw materials into a product, you don't have to deal with sales at all. But if you want to start making your own recipes, you got to make sure those recipes are marketable, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
If you are passionate about talking about beer like I am, and so you view one of your roles in the beer industry as talking with customers, doing interviews, spreading the word about the new offerings your brewery is offering, that's kind of like sales too, isn't it?
Yeah. For
Following market trends, deciding, well, next summer we need to come out with a new seasonal. What's it going to be? It might, a lot of brewers, I think if you polled a lot of brewers, they would brew basic American pale ales, West Coast IPAs, and plain yellow lagers, and that would be all they would make.
Right. That's probably
They wouldn't
true.
brew a single hazy beer. They wouldn't brew anything fruited, sour. They wouldn't allow lactose in their facility. The words chocolate would be forbidden.
Maybe.
But the truth is that you have to accept that that your individual tastes are not always super relevant for what your brewery is going to make and market and sell. And so as long as you're okay brewing a mixture of recipes you would like to drink and a mixture of recipes you wouldn't like to drink, and as long as you like following marketing trends, I mean, yeah, if that's how you define liking the business of selling beer, then I think I agree.
Sure. Yeah. And I think I may have butchered that quote as well, too. I think he was meaning more like if you want to own your own brewery, right? If you want to be the brewery owner, you're going to have to love the business of selling beer. And I think for me, I kind of agree with that. But still, at the same time, I agree with you, too, because there is more than just selling the beer, right? There's still the crafting of the beverage. And I mean, Ken Grossman, obviously, clearly, I mean, he's like one of the most famous examples of, right, a home brewer going to make a huge brewery at Sierra Nevada, right? I mean, he's one of those examples of like just pure experience, working from the ground up to build this huge, successful brewery. But he still says, and he'll say it to this day. I mean, I heard him like 6 months ago at a conference saying, the thing he cares about the most is not selling the beer or any of that stuff. It's the quality. Right. He cares about how good the beer is. Right. And it's kind of like the Field of Dreams thing. Right. If you build it, they will come. It's like if you make a fantastic quality beer, sales are going to be easier, right. And that kind of stuff. But quality is a huge portion, a huge part of beer. Right. And it can be sales related, but it can also be like making sure that the beer you're putting on the table is quality. And there's a lot of positions in quality that, probably require some sort of education or at least quite a bit of experience. Like if you're going to be doing things like yeast cell counting or, micro swabs or, chemistry analyses, like measuring bitterness and foam and all that sort of stuff, you might need some more education than somebody else. You can still get there through experience, but there's a lot of jobs and there's a lot of ways to get into each of these different positions. So let's talk about the different types of brewing curriculum. So you, as an instructor at a program that offers a certificate program, I wanted to ask sort of this question too: is brewing education all butt in seat? And then if you have to do some butt in seat education, I like this term. That's what my advisor calls it. Right? You're like sitting in a classroom and you have to learn something. Yeah. And if you have to do butt in seat education, or if you want to do butt in seat education, what are the options that are out there?
Sure. Well, so there are. There are a lot of options, and it depends on how formal you want to sort of view your education. Brewing is still an industry where having a formal 4-year degree is absolutely not a requirement or even necessarily expected. There might be a few roles where that's really, really beneficial. So, one of the things we talked about is quality. At larger breweries, there are whole departments devoted to quality, and a lot of that is, what we would call lab work. You're talking about cell counts or swabs or analyses, sort of any of that sort of testing and verifying. At a certain point, that becomes just a full-time job for someone or multiple someones. It's often really great if that person has a formal education, so like UC Davis offers a 4-year degree basically in all things related to yeast. And that makes sense. They're close to wine country, so it's just as much about, wine fermentation as it is about beer fermentation. But sort of a microbiological background or a chemistry background is really beneficial for those types of positions. And that's where a 4-year degree could be really valuable, or the combination of, say, a 4-year degree in one of those disciplines and some additional beer education to really sort of focus in on what we do, for brewing. There are, outside of 4-year degrees, though, there are some sort of less formal options, and that's where like DCTC falls. So we offer a certificate, which is a lot of programs offer that. A certificate generally means you've taken multiple courses that sort of add up to some amount of knowledge. And the institution is saying, we believe this person has sort of a well-rounded understanding of X topic. And we think that because they've taken multiple courses and sort of followed a progression. And so that's what we offer here at DCTC. Our certificate is a 1-year program, so that's 1 school year, right? So, it's like a fall semester, then we take a winter break, and then we do a spring semester, sort of like a traditional American school year. If you go through one of those cycles, you'd complete the certificate for the brewing program. A lot of other places will do a certificate, but in a more condensed timeline. That's something I did with like Siebel, for example, Siebel Institute of Technology in Chicago. It's a certificate program, but they condense it down into like 6 weeks. So, but you're there like 9 to 5 every day. It becomes a full-time job of like, you're talking about butts in seat time. That is 40 hours a week of butts in seat time. Then go home, do some homework, and come back and do it the next day. And I think their goal is, hey, you want to get this done and over with. So let's just cram it all in as fast as possible. With DCTC, this is something that I think we're doing maybe differently than most other places around the country is we think, well, what if we spread that out to sort of accommodate the schedule of someone who has a job? A lot of our students currently have those sort of entry-level positions I mentioned in the brewing industry. They might already work as, a a packaging tech or a delivery driver or maybe even a cellar person or an assistant brewer at a brewery already. So they're working Monday to Friday. They don't necessarily want to take time off. And so we offer that certificate as a way to sort of fit in with the work schedule. And then you could just, instead of doing a full certificate, you could decide, you know what, maybe you've already got a job in the beer industry, or maybe you think you're well positioned to move into the beer industry, and you just want to take maybe a module or two to brush up on a particular area of knowledge. So that might be another way to approach brewing education. And there's a variety of institutions where you could do that, where you could just take, one or two modules, and maybe you eventually add that up to a certificate, but maybe you just take one module or one class, just about yeast handling, or maybe you take one just about, malting, the process of transforming raw grain into malted grain, or whatever it is you're interested in and that you think might sort of guide you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great summary of all of the different extension program, or all the different programs, a certificate, 4-year programs, extension courses. I mean, obviously OSU, also or Oregon State University, where I'm at too, has a 4-year bachelor's degree in fermentation science, which has a brewing component to it. And then there are, what I'm in right now, right, a master's and PhD program at Oregon State University. But that's going, for me, I'm fascinated by the science of beer. I'm fascinated by beer and brewing, and so to me, that was, and again, I wanted to also teach like you do. And so that's why I'm sort of going into this deep science and deep, teaching program. But there's a whole range, right? It's like for whatever it is that you want to do. And lest we forget, we've talked a lot about like, you can do this if you want to be in this position at a brewery or an XYZ, brewery. But there are also raw ingredients, right? Like hops and
right.
Growing and hops and malting, all, those types of places, yeast companies, there's a whole bunch of different yeast labs around the country now that are selling great yeast and doing fun things. So, getting into those places is also getting into the brewing industry, right? I have a friend who loves collecting yeast, right? It's like he's like a home microbiologist, and he doesn't have a microbiologist degree or anything either. I mean, I think he's a doctor, but doesn't have a microbiology degree. But he loves collecting yeast. He's got this like freezer of yeast that's just been stored down there. I was like, dude, you're basically your own yeast lab. And he was like, yeah, I know. And I was like, do you ever want to open a yeast lab? He's no, I just like collecting it. I just like having it. I like to be able to go into my yeast lab and say, here's my thing, but for some people who are interested in that kind of stuff, maybe that's down the road for you, is opening a yeast lab. Those are all jobs that are in the brewing industry. It's not just brewing beer or being the brewer. Now, being the brewer is fun and it's cool, designing the recipes and coming up with the beers that you're brewing and naming it and doing the marketing and branding. A lot of that is fun, but there are other things that you can do in other positions. Now, if you're going to pick between all of these different things, so you're looking for brewing education or something, what sorts of things do you have to weigh to decide whether it's worth it to you to do this, right? Like, and one of the biggest things I'm thinking of here is cost, right? A 4-year
right.
bachelor program is going to be expensive for a lot of people to stomach.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. I mean, in my opinion, if you are looking at a 4-year degree, in something beer related, you are probably looking at a brewer adjacent job more so than being a brewer. Unless you've got a very, clear pathway where you say, I'm going to own my own brewery. I've already got startup funding. This is what I'm doing. And I'm doing the 4-year education because I believe it'll pay off in the long run. Maybe that makes sense. But for the most part, that's, a 4-year degree is probably looking at more like those science related jobs we were talking about, working for, raw materials or yeast manufacturers, working for the engineers who design brewing equipment, or working in a brewery as like a lab, as a quality technician, as a microbiologist. I mean, breweries employ PhDs in microbiology just to manage their yeast for them, right? That's a whole job for breweries who are large enough. If you want to do the actual dirty work of making beer, of running the equipment, of actually turning valves and flipping switches, I would say like a certificate program is probably more in line with what you're looking for, and that's fantastic because first of all, it's a heck of a lot cheaper, and at an institution like where I am at, we're a technical college. Our focus is employment, really, right? It's education for mainly adults or non-traditional college students, and it's like, this is extremely relevant information for you to go and do a job and do it well and advance up the ladder in that industry. So I view like what we're doing at DCTC as a way to, teach you what's really relevant for working as a brewer in a brewery, because that's my background. That's where I came from. I came from being a brewer and from managing brewers. And so I'm distilling that experience down into saying, hey, there are a ton of skilled brewing jobs available, at least that I'm seeing around here in Minneapolis. And one way to get people those experience so they can fill those positions is through the school route. And so that's kind of where I see more of the certificates as being really valuable. What we're doing at DCTC, I mentioned it's scheduled so you can do it while you have another job. And that's one of the really big benefits, I think, of a program like this, is that if you have a day job right now and you're considering making the leap into the industry, something like what we offer at DCTC is really valuable because it allows you to try it out, see what it feels like. We include an internship as part of the curriculum. And so as part of the curriculum, you're getting into a brewery and actually seeing it working in action and actually participating in the brewing process. And that can help guide you to know that you're ready to make the leap. And like I said, we're a technical college. We're actually a community college, sort of in the grand scheme of things. So the cost is much, much more affordable. And most of our students could qualify for some sort of scholarship. We even have at DCTC some brewing program specific scholarships. So some local breweries are willing to foot the bill to send a student through our program. They have a vested interest in having people come and work for them. They want to employ people to make their product. We're talking about mission critical, right? They want to employ people to make their product that know what they're doing, that have a little bit of background, that understand industry norms and best practices. And so they are willing to foot the bill a little bit and to put up these scholarships.
Yeah, of course. I mean, they want people that know how to brew and know, like you said, like the specifics about the industry, right? Because home brewers know how to brew, right? There's no question. You know how to brew. You brew beer. You've made it and undoubtedly have made good beer, right? Like you might have even entered your beer in competitions and stuff. But there is a little bit of a difference whenever you're making it as a pro brewer, right? You have to make a whole bunch of different decisions, and you have maybe different sizes of equipment, which comes with different ingredient costs and different engineering expectations and maintenance and all these other sort of questions that are incredibly relevant. So I can absolutely see a brewery or an employer, wanting to sponsor that for their employees, so that their employee gets that depth of information and then can use that at the brewery, right? By oh yeah, we looked at a glycol system, at my certificate, and so I've seen a glycol system before. I'm not just looking at it for the first time when all of our tanks are heating up and the yeast is getting hot, right? It's nice to have that person. So I think we can certainly agree, like deepening your knowledge and understanding of beer is super important, especially, to be a better brewer. And if you want to enter a competitive industry too, because let's not forget, this industry is highly competitive. So that's the aspect I want to talk about when we get back right after this break.
Established in 1995, More Beer has been consistently serving the greater brewing community since the times IPA was expected to be bitter and clear, and there are reasons they've stuck around so long. In addition to their massive product selection and excellent customer service, More Beer has locations on both the west and the east coast of the United States, which translates into fast shipping times regardless of where you live. And when you spend more than $59, shipping is free. When you're in need of brewing ingredients and gear, there's no better option than morebeer.com, one of the most trusted shops on the planet.
When I made the transition from lawyer to cellar person, I went from courtrooms to cleaning tanks at a brewery. But getting that first job took a big risk from the owner. How can they be sure that this lawyer is actually going to be able to do the job or want to do the job? And Andrew, how does anyone at a brewery know if their new hire is actually going to be able to do the job?
Well, that's the paradox, isn't it? Because the best way to show that you know how to do the job is to have had the job already, to have done the job somewhere else before, which raises the question, well, how did you get that first job?
Yeah, exactly.
For me, it's some of it is you got to convince someone to take a chance on you. That's why those sort of entry level positions like a packaging tech or sort of a low level position is one way to sort of prove that at a bare minimum you can show up on time, be professional, be sober, run the equipment, follow SOPs, and prove that you're a good employee and teachable. And then it's an owner or a manager might be more willing to take a chance on you, or you say, hey, I've got some experience. I did it in school. Or like I think I mentioned earlier, with our program at DCTC, we have an internship component. The internship is a great way to say, hey, it's very little risk on the part of the brewery, who's the employer in this situation, because if it doesn't work out, your internship's over. They haven't made a giant commitment to you, and you just sort of end amicably. And so they're more willing to take a risk on someone who doesn't have any real experience. And they know that you do have some, at least theoretical sort of book-based knowledge to then go employ in the internship and get that real hands-on experience. And so having it on a resume, being able to say, hey, I went to school for this, I got a certificate in that, and even better, I did my internship here. That is sort of the best foot in the door, in my opinion.
I love it. I did my internship here, and by the way, here's the phone number for the head brewer or whoever, right? That you can call.
And you know what? Or even better,
yeah.
Many of my students, their first job is their internship. They start at the internship, and at the end of the internship, the head brewer says, oh, it's over already? Well, I've come to rely on you being here. Okay, let's turn this into a more permanent relationship. Yeah. And then now it's just a job.
Right, exactly. I mean, that's the dream, right, of every internship and certainly every program and student out there.
Right.
Yeah, but you mentioned earlier, so you made a decision too whenever you decided to switch over from musician and get into the brewing industry. And that decision involved getting a certificate through Siebel. Why did you choose Siebel, and why did you go that route?
I chose Siebel partly because there were many fewer options back then. A lot of these, programs that we're talking about didn't exist. Siebel was one of the only games in town, unless you wanted to go a more 2-year or 4-year route. I already had a 4-year degree. I didn't think I needed another 4-year degree. I really did just want to get that certificate to boost my real world, brewery knowledge. And so that's why I ultimately landed there. And in Minneapolis, Chicago was the closest. And I was able to go stay with some relatives in Chicago. And like I said, it was an in-person program, and it was condensed. So I was there for like several weeks and did all the schoolwork in a short amount of time. Nowadays, there's some way more accessible options. One of the things I'm really excited about is the online options. I've seen a few different, just in the last 2 years, online only or online focused certificates, modules pop up where you can just do the work at your own pace. And that's something we're launching at DCTC. So at DCTC, we've had for several years this 1-year certificate where students come to us, they sit down in the classroom. We also have a brewing lab on site. So we have some 10-gallon pilot systems and some 10-gallon conical fermenters and a glycol system and a keg cleaner and sort of all the things you would see in a commercial brewery in a small scale. So students who come to us at DCTC in the course of that school year are working on those pilot systems and getting real life practice, and they're brewing their own recipes. And then we send them out with an internship, and then they can scale that up to wherever they're doing their internship. But I've come to realize that that type of in-person program, while it does a really good job of teaching all the skills you need to work in a brewery, isn't always accessible to everyone. You have to be here in person. We run our program on Saturdays, but that means every Saturday you've got to find a way to get to the college. That means you got to have the work schedule to support it, the transportation to get here, the commitment to say I could be there every Saturday for, one school year's worth of time. And that's
the lack of family obligations too, right? Like, lack of family obligations, like things that you have to do with kids or whatever on weekends, all that stuff.
Well, that's exactly right. Yeah. And, we cater to adults. We cater to people with a day job. So that's why we do it on Saturdays. But even so, that's not a schedule or situation that works for everyone. That's why I am really excited to launch our online program too. So,
cool.
So starting this upcoming school year, so that'll be like August of this year, 2024. We will have a new online program. But we're kind of following the same model of what we've already established. So again, it'll be one school year. So it's not about cramming the knowledge in a short period of time. We space it out over one school year, so you can kind of just take it week by week, and supplement, what you already know. If you're already working in the industry, if you've already got one of those jobs and you want to, do the education aspect of it in order to sort of, jump up the ladder, then this is a really good fit. Or if you've already got a day job and don't want to, pack up and move across the country to go to college for beer, you can still work your day job and do the online school sort of at your own pace every week. Find those pockets in your schedule when you can do the coursework.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. There's so many things I love about that, right? First of all, like the online version. I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense, right? That a lot of people, and especially like having done a whole bunch of, I'm going to call it again, butt in seat coursework, right? A lot of that is just the professor lecturing to you, right? And like the professor standing up on the board, writing on a whiteboard, or going through some PowerPoint slides, and either hopefully not just reading the PowerPoint slides, but sometimes that happens, but hopefully it's explaining a concept to you, right? And so there is a certain amount of just like sitting and learning and just being a sponge and soaking that up. And that's perfect for online delivery, right? I mean, it's really nice to have that option, so that like, okay, I need to work 40 hours a week. I can't go sit in a classroom, or right. For Siebel, I can't go take off 6 weeks or 12 weeks or whatever that program is. If I do that, I'm essentially going to have to leave my job, go to Siebel, and then try to find another job, which is totally doable. People do that a lot. And in fact, I think it happens. Sometimes brewers, especially like if you're currently working for a brewery and you're saying, hey, I'm going to go do this certificate program, they might keep the job open for you depending on how long you're going to be there. But the online option is really cool because it's like you can now do that at your own time. You can do it at 10 o'clock at night after the kids are asleep, or,
right.
On Sunday morning instead of Saturday, or like whenever it's available for you. But it is interesting too, because I think there is this like some of it also requires a little bit of hands-on knowledge, right? Or a little bit of like hands-on thing. And so I think I love these, what I'm starting to see a lot more of is these sort of hybrid programs where there's the online component and then you come to the place for like a week or 2 weeks or whatever. And you get all of the hands-on training. I really like those programs, and I think that's really a nice trend, but it's cool to see here that you guys are doing an online version of the certificate to just make these things more successful. Because again, I think a lot of people that are going and getting these certificate programs are doing this because they want to get that job in the brewing industry. You want to have a piece of paper that says like, hey, I know what I'm talking about. I'm not just some home brewer that, loves beer and has no idea what they're getting into.
Right. Right. And that's, I think you're exactly right. What you mentioned makes me think of, the importance of the hands-on aspect of the brewing. It's a physical job that involves, actually doing a process in real life. It's not, so inevitably any sort of beer related education is going to have to involve some hands-on element. That was one of the challenges with designing this online curriculum, is how do we do that? Where we landed is to really lean on the internship component. So the expectation with the online curriculum that we're doing at DCTC is that the students are doing that alongside an internship the whole way. So in my experience, it's not too difficult. If you are enrolled in a program with some credibility, it's not too difficult to go to a brewery that you like, that's local to you, and say, can I do my internship here? Can I just come shadow 1 day a week and see what you're doing? And if you're just some home brewer off the street, some person's like, hey, can I just see how you make the beer? You probably won't, they might be less willing to let you into the production space. But if you say, hey, I'm doing this college program, I'm paying money for real college credit, I'm learning from this instructor who has real industry experience, and I've got to do this internship, can I come learn from you? I mean, most head brewers have a little bit of an ego, and they're saying, well, yeah, you can learn from me. I know a thing or two. I'd be happy to show you what we're doing back here.
Yeah. And so that was actually, I was going to ask that. So if you live anywhere, if you don't live in Minneapolis, right? Can you do it? Can you still take the online certificate and do the internship component at local brewery in your area?
Yeah, absolutely.
Nice.
Yeah. That is something we're totally open to. As instructor, one of the things I have to do is mediate the relationship between breweries and the students who are doing the internships. So obviously I have a lot of connections with breweries local to me in Minnesota, but we envision that with the online program through email, through Zoom, like we're talking right now, there isn't really a barrier for us to develop those relationships with any brewery. So if you are anywhere around the country or even around the world and you wanted to enroll in this online program, you can take the courses at your own pace online and then find a brewery local to you. As long as I can email with the head brewer and we can make sure that the relationship is on a sound footing, then you can just be doing your internship there and wherever is local to you.
Yeah, that's really cool. Again, I think this is again, I think this is sort of one of the, maybe not, it's happening right now, so it's not the future anymore, right? It's the present.
Right, exactly.
But I love this because you can take your online courses and do it's no longer butt and seat because it's online. Maybe it is. It's butt and seat in front of a computer. But you can learn the theoretical aspects and then you still have that internship practical component to it too. And you're local, right? I mean, whenever I was looking at making the jump from lawyer to what I'm doing now, first thing was I had to figure out what it was that I wanted to do in the brewing industry. I knew I didn't really want to own my own brewery because I'm not really interested in HR and taxes and selling the beer and all these other sort of like business aspects. But I love the brewing science. So for me, it was a question of, okay, if I want to go and maybe get a quality position or a quality tech spot, where would I need to go and what would I need to do that? And Siebel was one of those that came up, right? I'm sure if I search now, DCTC would be one of those that also comes up as a certificate program. And one of the struggles, especially for Siebel is like, yeah, you got to go to Chicago. And then also depending on if you want to do the Germany component of it too, you're then going to Germany for a month. Right. And it's like, well, I got a kid and I can't leave for, 6 months and go somewhere else. Or I could, but my wife would be really pissed if I did that, so there's all these like other personal things, or like I live in this area in this town and this is where I want to stay, right? I don't want to move to Minneapolis or Chicago or wherever else. But if you have these online programs like what you've got at DCTC, you've now opened up the experience, right? You've opened up your expertise and experience, your program and curriculum to people all around the country. And I think that's really, really cool. And I hope to see more institutions, embody that as well. So I wanted to talk then about how you get that first interview, because I think that's a key component of this too, right? We talked about education and why you might not or why want to get that education, but how do you get into that job? And I guess I'll ask you, I think I'm going to ask you all these questions at once instead of spreading them out. I was going to ask, how did you get your first job? But then also like, how did you even find that job? And how do you know I'm sure you've had to do hiring now. How do you know what the brewer's even looking for? Like, what's the company even looking for whenever you get into the interview or you submit your resume?
Well, so for me personally, I got into my first brewery job through working as a home brewer, through being, at the home brewing store, working as a retailer, teaching classes. Inevitably, commercial brewers are coming through the home brewing store every once in a while, if not every day. And a lot of people who want to start a brewery are, in the homebrew store because they're brewing at home and starting their trial batches. They've maybe been brewing for years. And so just through sort of traditional networking and just clubs and who is how my first foray into the beer world was. But that is maybe a path that is less reliable every year, right?
Sure, yeah.
And so when I was hiring brewers, nowadays it's much more, at least in sort of a mid-sized brewery that is going to hire multiple brewers, right? It is about being able to represent that you have some relevant experience and some sort of relevant knowledge base that means that you are trainable and teachable. When I was a brewery manager, the best thing I could ask for an employee is someone who really understands process and following SOPs and the why of what we're doing, but doesn't necessarily have a closed mindset in terms of this is the only way to do something, So that means that you might not necessarily have to have a brewing background directly to impress someone who's hiring for brewers. You could have other, beverage manufacturing or food manufacturing experience. A lot of the people who ultimately made the best employees were those who had some sort of relevant production experience, just making stuff. And that said, I know a lot about beer. I have a passion for craft beer. I can tell you all about the ingredients and the styles and what goes into what. I've never brewed beer before, but I used to work at a factory making X, Y, and Z. So I'm kind of familiar with the idea of a process. And that's sort of really what the art of brewing ultimately boils down to, is it's equal parts beer knowledge and industry production knowledge, which is something that homebrewers often are, lacking. But that's okay. I mean, that's, if you've got a strong beer side, you can always learn the production side. And if you've got a strong production side, you can always learn the beer side.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and you mentioned a couple of times there the word passion, right? I think that's a big thing about what employers are looking for. Like, is this person really want this job, right? Like, are they passionate about this? Are they going to learn? Are they going to get involved in the company? That's a big piece of it. But like you said, I feel like you can learn anything if you want to. If you put your mind to it and you really try and you want to learn it. If you identify that there's an area that you don't have information on or that you don't know very well, that's where those certificate programs and stuff, that's exactly the niche that it fits, because then not only do you get to say, hey, yeah, I'm a home brewer and I've been brewing for X number of years and I've got this XYZ competition, I'm a BJCP judge, whatever, and I have a certificate that I went to this program, and I know things about the beer brewing industry. I'm looking for that first job, let me in, kind of thing.
I can tell you, as someone who did a lot of hiring and had looked at a lot of resumes, the least impressive resumes were the ones that were filled with, here's the pictures of all the labels of my home brew, and these are the names of beers I've come up with and how I've won all these awards.
Oh man.
And it's like, it's like, that's fantastic. I love your passion. But if you just told me like, man, I don't really care about entering competitions. I just really want to make really, really great beer. And here's the beer I'm really proud of that I made recently. That speaks much louder than sort of, like the frantic craft beer energy.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely true too. I mean, and that is a big deal, right? I mean, I think a lot of homebrewers are confident in their process and confident in what they're doing. If you're going to transition from home brewer to pro brewer, you're doing the same thing. You're still making beer, right? But there's aspects of it that are different. And also, too, if you're going to work for somebody else, you're working for them. You're making beer that they're selling or that they're doing, right? And you're working under them in their processes. So, yeah, you can bring your own knowledge, but if you start, throwing your weight around and saying, no, this is the best way to do it, or, oh, well, I won this competition, so I know how to make a Kolsch, that's not going to get you very far.
Right. Well, and I think that's one of the values of a more formal education, is it introduces you to the idea of there are often many different ways to accomplish the same end result, or to go through the same process. And a lot of what I teach is saying there's no one right way to do any part of the brewing process. There's trade-offs with everything, and every brewery is a unique business. They have unique space, unique process, unique equipment, unique goals, unique sales targets, unique styles they're brewing. And so what fits in one brewery is not always going to make sense in the other brewery. So a lot of times it's a trade-off between money and complexity versus like consistency.
Yeah.
Right. And homebrewers are often willing to give up consistency for the sake of not having to bother with expensive, complex equipment. Right. And I think that's been one of the most liberating trends in homebrewing. If I think of my homebrewing journey, I mean, the idea of going from like 3-burner, all stainless, 3-tier gravity fed systems with recirculation pumps and all this complicated equipment to brew in a bag, no chill, don't worry about it.
Yep.
It's been tremendously liberating for homebrewers, but that's because homebrewers have a different goal. Efficiency and consistency are not necessarily the goals of a homebrewer. And so we're happy to trade off complexity and cost to give up, But that isn't always relevant in industry. And so you have to have the open mind to realize, okay, every industry and every business has its own goals, and there's a solution that fits that brewery that doesn't necessarily fit some other brewery.
Totally.
And that's okay.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, I think another thing with homebrewers too, like especially because homebrewing is a hobby, right? And so a lot of people don't track costs of their hobbies, right? Because you're just doing it for fun, right? You're not tracking like how much this costs. How many times have you heard two people who said like, "Oh, the first time I got into homebrewing was so that I could make cheap beer or beer cheaper than you bid." I don't think I've ever made a batch that I could like that was cheaper than something I could buy at the store. You know.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, my catchphrase when I was homebrewing primarily before I got into industry was, "Hey, it's cheaper than golf." Right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Maybe.
Like that's the idea, right? It's I'm going to be buying beer anyway. It's not cheaper for me to make it myself. But, you got to have a hobby.
That's right. You got to have a hobby. It's fun. But we have to talk about money a little bit here, too, because that's a big piece of it, right? For homebrewers, again, that you're not tracking the cost of what it takes to make or equipment or any of these things. When you go to be a pro brewer, especially if you're going to run your own shop, you have to start being concerned about these things, right? I think you mentioned a great thing, right? Like this, brew in a bag, right? And that's not possible at a homebrew level, at least at any sort of like large enough scale where you can, well, at least I think it's not possible, but
I mean, it starts to even become impractical at 10 gallons batches, much less 10 barrel batches, right?
Exactly. That's exactly my point, but another thing too is like you mentioned, the consistency and efficiency, right? Because if you've done brew in a bag, you know that you lose efficiency over like batch sparging and fly sparging. Those are more efficient processes. You get more extract out of the beer. And so that may mean I sell an extra barrel or two or whatever, or an extra half barrel or whatever scale I'm at. If I get a little bit,
or this batch of beer costs $1,000 worth of grain instead of $1,200 worth of grain.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Or 10,000 versus 12,000.
Oh yeah.
Now the numbers start to really make sense.
Exactly. And you're responsible to those things too, right? I mean, most people who own a brewery aren't coming in with, whatever it costs to own a brewery, $1 million of their own money that they're just setting up and saying, okay, here, I'm going to go run a brewery. Most people are getting either bank loans or getting, funding from venture capital or some other place, or, friends and family that are kind of coming together to help you buy and support your equipment. So there are other people that you start to be responsible to if you want to run your own shop. Now that's kind of high level running your own shop, but also thinking about like a brewer, right? A brewer, those jobs don't pay a whole lot of money. They're not nothing, right? I mean, they're going to be more than like minimum wage jobs, but it's hard to justify getting a 4-year degree and paying a lot of money to an institution to then go and work as a brewer. That's not to say that you can't do it. A lot of people do go and get 4-year degrees and then work as a brewer. That works for them and they can make it work. But this cost aspect of it and what you're going to earn and where you're going to go is a decision factor in what kind of program you choose.
I mean, I think that's absolutely true. In my experience, the brewing world is littered with people who said, you know what, I took a pay cut to go get this brewing job. And that tells you right there that there are ways to make more money, right? Yeah. But it also tells you that people are willing to take that pay cut because of some of those benefits, because you are making a product that you're really passionate about, that you're excited to talk about, that isn't, something that you dread. As much as I poo-poo, a double chocolate, super vanilla, triple hazy IPA sour fruit beer.
I think you hit it all there. Yeah.
I would rather make that than make, nuts and bolts all day long. Right. Or whatever it is. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Right.
And so there are definitely some perks of being in the industry. Almost every brewery, you get some amount of free beer. You get some amount of discounted beer. You get some amount of the ability to share beer with your friends and family and to sort of cut them in on the benefits of knowing someone who works at a brewery. Because it's in the brewery's best interest to have their product viewed in a positive light and to be able to share it with more people who will ultimately become customers. So there are perks to working in a brewery, and the pay is, like you said, it's usually, significantly better than minimum wage, but not, for depending on the area you live in, right? Not, extreme high end type jobs. But that is also changing too. As breweries get bigger, breweries are starting to realize that there is some real value in some of those positions that are really responsible for efficiency and cost savings. And that, if you can get some real experience as a shift brewer, as a brewer, in a facility, that really is focused on efficiency and consistency and quality, you can often parlay that into a job that is focused exclusively on those things. Maybe you are the head of a quality control department or the head of a lab, or you will become a head brewer at a new facility where the owners say, hey, listen, we're hiring a new head brewer because we really need to focus on efficiency. We really need to focus on consistency. And we want to bring you in to train our team up on what you've learned. So, even, your typical 9-to-5 brewer or shift brewer is making good money, but not not retire early money, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But that isn't the end of the line, and that there is still room to grow and to sort of become a professional and to prove your worth to the industry.
Yeah, and I think of also with a 4-year degree too, right? Like sure, somebody's hiring a shift brewer, and that may be where you start after a 4-year degree, but you also have upward mobility too, right? I think once you get into some of those management type positions, people are looking around saying like, okay, what experience do you have? Do you have a certificate? Do you have a degree? Do you have something that someone independently has like sort of like, I don't know, for lack of a better word, like just like said, okay, yeah, this person knows what they're talking about. Right. Objectively, it's just like, yeah, they know a thing or two, and that becomes important, especially as you're moving up in a company. Experience can totally do that, but like you said, the accelerator of having an education can be a way to jump those things, right? So instead of going shift brewer 1, shift brewer 2, shift brewer 3, you may go shift brewer 1 to brewing manager to then head brewer at a small brewery to then head brewer managing a team, right?
Right. Exactly.
And those,
ultimately, head of production, right? Where now you're talking, more than just brewing. It's also brewing and packaging and distribution, and those are, 6-figure and up jobs at that point.
Yeah, exactly. And the education can springboard you up into those points, right? You can certainly get there by experience. So 4-year degrees in that way, yeah, it may be expensive. And again, certificates can get you there too. It just depends on what's important for you and where you want to go and what's available, where you live, all that stuff. So I wanted to sort of go through this little like hypothetical at the end before we sort of wrap things up. And I wanted to ask you this question. So hypothetical, let's say I'm a home brewer or I'm somebody that wants to get into the brewery or to the brewing industry. Walk me through some granular steps, like some things like do this, don't do that kind of thing.
Right. So, if you, I guess let's be more specific. Are you a home brewer who wants to open a brewery, or are you a home brewer who wants to work at a brewery?
Oh man, let's say home brewer that wants to open a brewery, right?
So you're a home brewer who wants to open a brewery. Yeah. So the first thing I would say to a home brewer who wants to open a brewery is find a way to go work at a brewery, right? So, if step one is really get that real relevant experience. And that probably might, if you want to accelerate it and jumpstart that probably means there's an educational component to that, or do both simultaneously. I have, maybe about a third of my students that come through DCTC, this is their career path. They, already made their first career. They're homebrewers as a hobby, and they are taking this program because they want to transition to owner. They want to open their own brewery. And so the education and getting some real relevant experience is probably the first step. First of all, this is going to verify that, yes, this is something that you're capable of doing and that you want to do, right? You get to sort of see how the sausage is made and go, yes, this is a business I want to get into. And sort of crystallize what's real versus what's a dream, right?
Yeah, totally. Yep. Yeah, I actually have personal experience on that too, right? Whenever I switched, so I didn't go straight from being an attorney to studying at brewing. I worked for a brewery for 10 months, right? And one of those things was like, I don't even know if I want to work in the beer industry. Like, what's it like, And so I wanted to go and get brewing experience. And so that's why I worked as a cellar person. I think that's super important, especially if you're changing a career, right? And taking a salary cut or a pay cut or whatever, just taking a totally different path for your life. You need some information to see if that's something that you want to do.
So that would be the first thing, is go work in a brewery. And even if you don't view yourself as the type of owner who is sort of a hands-on, wear the boots and get dirty type owner, even if you view the sort of the size and scope of your brewery as something like, oh no, we're going to hire brewers, we're going to hire cellar people, it's still incredibly valuable for you to know how to do those things, what those processes are like, because you're going to have to train people, you're going to have to hire people, you're going to have to interview people. If you just want to be an owner but not a brewer, you're going to have to hire your brewer. You're going to have to hire your head brewer who comes up with your processes and works on your equipment and adapts your homebrew recipes into commercial recipes. And you better know enough about the industry to conduct that interview and hire the right person. So getting some education and getting some real lived worked experience, I think, is really important for the potential sort of brewery owner. The next thing I would do is I would retain a lawyer.
I can appreciate that.
And this isn't lip service to you. This is,
I know, right?
It's a complicated industry with a lot of regulations, both and because we have a patchwork of alcohol laws in this country, it's not as simple as, well, here's the law, follow it, because there's federal laws and state laws and county laws and local laws. There's 3-tier laws. Every state's unique. Every municipality has their own additional restrictions. And what you can and can't do is not always straight and obvious and to the point. And to be honest with you, I'm not even an expert in that. I'm an expert in production and process. I am not an expert in the law. And I tell my students, you got to talk to a lawyer. You got to have a lawyer who is representing the best interests of the business.
Yeah.
And then it's probably an issue of, and this could happen in any order, but it's finding a location, finding a funding source, and finding what I call like a hook. In the early days of the craft beer boom, up until probably the mid 2000s or even the early 2010s, the fact that you were a brewery was probably the hook in and of itself. Like, hey, we could go to this restaurant, we could go to this bar, or, oh my gosh, what a novel concept. We could go to a location that is brewing the beer right there on site. They actually make it themselves. Can you believe it? Right. And that was sort of the hook, was the fact that you're a brewery. In most locations, at least around the United States right now, there are plenty of breweries to choose from. So being a brewery is no longer sort of a novel business. And while you will attract customers, you've got to find a way to have like a sustaining customer base that keeps coming back to your product over and over again. And so you've got to find out what it is you do. And maybe that's related to the product you make. Maybe that's related to how you market it. Maybe that's related to your physical space. One of the reasons why breweries are able to be sort of successful businesses is because in most places we can sell direct to the consumer in a tasting room or a tap room or something like that. And so we can cut out the middlemen of distribution and of retail locations. And so that means higher margin for the brewery. That's a good thing. But that means that you've got to find a way to attract people directly to your space and convince them that it's worthwhile to go there. And I can't tell you what your hook is going to be, but it's got to be something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, you got to find something that sets you apart, that makes you different, that makes your beer different than other people's beer, especially in a this is 7,000-8,000 brewery climate that we're in now.
Right. Or even what sets your space apart. There are tap rooms that are also comedy clubs. There's tap rooms that are live music and dance venues. There's tap rooms that are gaming cafes. There's tap rooms that specialize in only barrel-aged stuff or only sour stuff, or, tap rooms that specialize in collaborations with whatever it is. You've got to have something. And then, like I said, you got to figure out what your location is, and maybe the location will dictate what your hook is. And then you've probably got to have some sort of funding source. Like we said, it's probably a combination of backers and bank loans. In my opinion, it seems to me that most breweries start with a small number of investors and owners, people who are willing to put their own money on the line and sort of create that seed money, which is then used as collateral to get a bank loan, like a small business loan. And then that loan is what actually allows the business to begin operating and get your location and get your equipment and hire your first employees, buy your ingredients, and start making money. that's kind of the sort of the order of things.
Yeah. Well, man, those are incredibly useful steps, right? Find a job in the brewery, figure out what education you need, figure out your space, your hook, all of that kind of stuff. For if you are a home brewer that wants to own your own brewery, how to do that. I wish I could ask you some other hypotheticals, like if you wanted to go a different direction, and what would you do? But last, we don't have time to go through that today. But I do always like to ask my guests this one question at the end. So if you want listeners to take away just one thing from today's episode, what would it be?
Well, I guess the one thing I would take away is that there are multiple avenues to get into the beer industry, and there's multiple definitions of what success means. But a lot of the time, education, especially the certificate programs like what I teach, are a great introduction or beginning step to make that process, and can help you realize where you want to go if this is something you want to do, and that if this is something that you're seriously considering, the sooner you give it a go, try out that education route, see if it's going to work for you, I think the better. So yeah,
I love it. I don't think I can add anything to that. I think it was eloquently stated and perfect. So Andrew, is there anything else that you wanted to share that we didn't get to talk about today?
I just got to plug Dakota County Technical College. So if you want to find out more about our programs, you can go to dctc.edu/brew. That's dctc.edu/BREW. I have information about the program, a short video from me. I mentioned the new online program. If you look at the website, that might not be there yet, depending on when you look at the website. It's a brand new program we're launching. So information will be added to that page as it becomes relevant. But rest assured, there is an online program that is going starting in August of this year for the fall semester, as well as our main in-person sort of flagship program that we've been doing for years.
Awesome. Yeah. And of course, listeners, in the show notes, you will be able to find a link to that website. So click on the notes in the show. All right. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for joining me in the Brew Lab.
Thanks a lot.
All right. Well, next week, Jordan and I will be back talking about this episode. We'll see y'all then. The Brew Lab is a production of Brewlosophy, where they who drink beer think beer. Don't forget to visit brewlosophy.com to read about our weekly experiments and other brewing adventures, and listen to us talk about it on our other show, the Brewlosophy Podcast. Thanks to all of our sponsors and patrons that help make this show possible. If you'd like to receive a reward for helping us do what we do, visit patreon.com/brewlosophy to see how you can do just that. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back in the Brew Lab with another guest next week. Until then, think beer.